Namaskar and welcome to this exciting new episode of Satyology Debunking Mythology. Sat is a Sanskrit root word dhatu, meaning truth. And for etymological reasons, when you combine with to rhyme it with mythology, we have to add additional O, Satyology, additional T to emphasize on Sat, which is the truth. Satyology means science of truth or study of truth. Opposite of that is mythology, which means the science of fake lie imagination, because myth is a Sanskrit root word, a dhatu, which means actually a fake lie imagination. It's a root word for mithya, mithyachar, mithyahankar, and many other words like that. So mythology means science of fake lie imagination or study of fake lie imagination. Please, I say it all the time that the Vedic literatures or Vedic scriptures or Vedic Shastra, they have been proved multiple times astronomically, archaeologically, and also the references and the wisdom they give us has never changed. So therefore, do not call it mythology. Do not call it mythology. I have a very, very special guest today. So let us welcome Pankaj Gandhi. You loved his last show on Dhanur Veda, an introduction to some weapons. And today we're going to go a little deep into that. Welcome, Pankaj.
Namaste, everyone, and thank you for inviting me again. So today, I'm thinking that we are most probably going to talk about like what type of bows, arrows, and quivers used to use it, and what we used to call them. And here, like also in my front slide, you see in the last week also there are some type of arrows which was originally from 18th century, and that was also used in throughout the region of the northwest when the Rajputana Empire used to be. So this picture is from there too, just so you know.
So before we start this conversation, there is a lot
Hmm.
of myth being spread that most of the Western academics call everyone as a caveman. So the caveman built Rome because Rome was built uh, uh, before the Romans acquired it. It was built before. Greeks had already built a huge city. So all these huge cities, huge pyramids were built by people who used to only work with the wood and stone. And that's the myth being spread, and it's very easily digested along with the American breakfast by most of the people. So what do you have to say on that to those mythologists who are masquerading as academics?
See, the thing is like, we have facts, and that's the most important part. Like how long we are using the information and how long we are using our knowledge. We have like a proof and facts. So I don't think so. We even have to care about what other people and like the people who call them into a lot like academia ever understand, like how much knowledge we already have. It's just like whenever they make these kind of claim, they assume that the person who's sitting opposite or doesn't know any knowledge about it. So you can call whatever you're gonna call them, like cavemen or whatever, but the truth is like we basically have all this continuous civilization from at least 5 to 7,000 year old, and we are using that knowledge sharing from the time we don't even remember. So it's really hard when you have already facts and figures to prove it. Like how can you call somebody like that?
Hmm. The Western concept of the life starting at 4000 BC, that's where they go.
Hmm.
And they themselves keep on discovering items which are much more advanced than that. Within
Exactly.
USA, 7,000, 8,000, 10,000 years old. And so they debunk themselves all the time, but the obstinacy in accepting or speaking the truth is astounding. What do you have to say on that?
Yes, I think it's because of like if they accept the truth, then they have to neglect the whole their religion, and that's when it's dilemma, because if you accept that means whatever is written in Bible or Old Testament, everything is wrong. So how you can justify that? So the world biggest religion is going to be shattered if you basically accept the truth. So they have to balance it, or they have to hide the truth, I guess. And that was the main purpose for the whole thing from last 2000 year.
Yeah. Okay, we can start your presentation. You can present it.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, for the viewers, the reason why I ask these questions on the Western academics is Just to show you the point that most of the things that are being taught in the American universities is far from truth. And and unfortunately, the rest of the world tries to copy them or follow them, and they also get into the same path. And you can continue to share, Pankaj.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right. You can see my screen, right?
not yet.
Oh. You can see it now, right?
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So before we go start, like I just want to tell that these arrows also were using from the northwest, because you see the picture, and these are like different type of arrows head, and it was using for different purpose. I have some examples today to show that during 17th 18th century what kind of arrows were using for what purpose, because every arrow built for a purpose. It's just not to a lot of people like why we have different types of arrowhead. So we're going to talk more, discuss deep discussion about it today. So for the starting, I think Agni Puran is one of the great examples. So I just pick up that one example. We have other examples too, but I just want to give from Agni Puran that what is defined in Agni Puran and what kind of bow and material they used to use it to build it. So I'm not gonna read the whole detail, but just give you these three main point that as per the Agni Puran, the best bow is the 4 cubit long or 6 feet, and the medium is 5.25 feet, and the inferior is 4.5 feet. 4 cubit, 3.5, and 3 cubit. That's how in Agni Puran defined that this size of the bow should be used. And again, they are most like talking about the long bows, and we can talk more about like what is long bows or what is other type of bows we have at, and like what are the material the string bow used to make it for, and also like there's a horn composite bow which have different shape and size. We can talk more about it. And then there's some metal bows we using it, and also there's wooden long bows. So this measurement is specific to the wooden long bows, just so you're aware. Okay, so types of bows in Dhanurveda. And so in Dhanurveda in specific, there are four from Niti Prakashika, or you basically refers to the Vasishtha Dhanurveda or Shiva Dhanurveda. This is the four main type of bow was defined over there. And the first one is called the Saranga bow. And a lot of people, especially in India, know heard the word at least once or twice in their life about the Saranga. It's because it's a celestial bow of Lord Vishnu, also have Saranga bow. But when you go in the detail and read from even the Bhagavad Puran or read the Vishnu Dharmottar and other information, or in Mahabharata, Sarang bow is actually defined as like made up of horn and wood composite, or just only a horn bow. So horn means like they use the animal horn to make the bow. And if you see this picture here, you see this is the pieces of the wood. They basically join from multiple V joints, and this is the buffalo horn they are using it. And on the top there is a white layer which basically a tendon or sinew which give the elasticity of the bow. And that's how the bow was building till 18th century, and especially the composite bow. And so I just want to give the example here that how it used to made and what are the sections and the parts of made it for. And this is the simplest form. Some bows get really complicated, and some bows like have so much layers. So this is like the most simplest form I can find to explain it. And this is like in the modern term we call as a composite bow. So that's actually our term we are using in India as a saranga bow. And Trinath bow is basically the way it's defined. It doesn't tell the material defined in Dhanurved. It just says that the bow that is bent at 3 places. So, and it should be composite bow, because if the bow can bend multiple places, then it shouldn't be like a straight long bow. Otherwise, it's gonna break. So in my assumption, it should be composite bow, and we can see the picture later. And then whenever bow is basically made up of bamboo with the forehand, and forehands is equal to 6 feet. So this is our, and can be bent fully. So that was our long bow, used to call it in the modern term. And in India or in Dhanurveda, it's called Venava bow. And then the last one is the Vetastika. Now, Vetastika bow is basically only one hand in length. So it's super small, and then using a 12 finger length of arrows. So it's using a small arrow. So assumption wise, it could be the crossbow, or it could be some different type of bow. Unfortunately, we do not have any specimen available so that we can confirm that how it looks like it, because in Dhanurveda, it's only give us the name that, and give us the description of this, that how it's basically the size of it and what size of the arrow it's using. So if we compare with the modern bows, it can be easily comparable with the crossbow. And this is the manuscript from the 15th century, and which also talk about different types of bows here. And also, I just want to basically show you guys that the same manuscript also shows us, and this is written in actually Persian, but it's actually talk about the Dhanurveda. And we can talk what are the names of the bow in the next slide. And what this soldier is doing is basically have this kind of mechanism, and that was we using it at least from, I don't know, maybe 1,000 years, because any oldest manuscript I found, they have basically the same mechanism. So in India, we are using, like, they load the weight here, and they basically pull it and use and make sure this hand is straight. And once we talk about in the future that the practice of Dhanurvidya or the practice of archery, then we can discuss more about the posture and the movement of your hands and your standing positions, more detail. But so to give you the shoulder strength, they used to use this kind of mechanism for till 18th century for almost all the archers. So these are the bows we basically currently available in different part of the world and different museums. So this is the Venava bow, or we can call it longbow. And this one is specific, have like different type of paintings, and like another picture we can able to see it. But I didn't put it here. And in this particular bow, this is like 6 feet long bow. And in the mechanism wise, it looks super simple, but it's very strong bow. And also it's called, like in our previous slide here, this particular bow is called Triambak bow. So some part of the India, it used to call Triambak bow. And also in in Ramayana, it used to call as a Kodanda bow. And a lot of people assume that Kodanda bow is more like celestial bow, or some kind of like bow that doesn't exist, or we don't know. So what Dhanurveda defined as that the Kodanda bow is basically when you use the bamboo to build the bow, and for within a 6 feet of the height of the bamboo, if there is 9 different joints in bamboo, then that particular bow is called, and the bow made up of that bamboo is called the Kodanda bow. And that's how it was defined. And so if you find, like even today, which is really hard to find because the bamboo, the way it's grow, you can't able to find the 9 joints within a 6 feet. So if you find it and if you make the bow out of it, that's particularly bow called the Kodanda bow. And it's basically doesn't break easily, because if it's a multiple joint, so it doesn't it give more strength and it doesn't break easily. So that's why it's more important. And that's why Bhagwan Sri Ram used to call it as a Kodandadhari, or the one who hold the Kodanda bow. So which is also the type of long bow. It just have different functionality. And then again, we talk about the last video that what is Gulil bow, or the bow which basically used to throw the marbles or the types of stones. So this one is particularly, like if you see the cloth here, that's where they put the small marbles or small rocks. And this particular bow used to use to throw the marbles and rocks. And this is called the Kamdev bow. And it's basically, in the previous times, it used to make either bronze and gold and silver inlaid and different other material. But in the modern terms, what we found it is mostly made up of steel. And also in uh, Kautilya Arthashastra also is defined that they used to use this steel, or they call the black iron. So they are using the Kamdevo. We call the Kamdevo because that's what is defined, and it doesn't give detail about in Dhanurveda, but in this Persian manuscript, this particular bow is basically called the Kamdevo, which was basically continuation of using it. Because in the modern term, we don't call anything, we just call that a steel bow. And it was mostly popular in all over India. You don't find these kind of bows any part of the world other than India. And this is command bow. So command bow is more like come from Turkic people. When they invaded India, they were using this type of bow. So, and that's why this command word is actually a Turkic word, or Persian or Mughal people used to call it. And they basically continue using it. But this particular bow is coming from Maratha Empire, and this is in the Victoria Museum, but it was gifted by the Holkar, the king of Indore, who is like under Maratha Empire. So even the Marathas were using these type of bows and arrows. And this is the example of the sarang bow, which I show in the previous, how the construction of that bow build up. So this is the final product look like it, and this is currently in the British Museum. So this is how the sarang bow is actually should look like it. Aditya ji, if you have any question, let me know. And then this one is Trinath bow, which also defined in the Dhanurveda.
One question I have is,
yes,
what is the distance to which these different bows bows throw the arrows to?
So it's all depend on the how big strength we are having it. So if you in the previous one, like the long bows are mostly built for hard hitting. So it doesn't goes for the very long distance, but it can hit you very hard in the shorter distance. And and then the sarang bow can make you distance shooting, but it probably is not that hard. Depend on, and again, also depend on what type of arrows we are using. But composite bows are basically more for long distance shootings, and for horseback shootings they were using it. But for chariot shooting, or what you call like the infantry shooting, it's a longbow was the one actually using it. And this one is like in the olden time used for the elephant warriors, the one who is on the elephants, they are using, or the infantry, the horse archers are using these kind of bows. So they can basically move faster, and they can have like more distance shooting for that. And then this one is the Trinath bow. So Trinath bow is like we just made it because we found it in the Sanoli. Sanoli is one of the city in the North India where they just have found the first chariot in Indian subcontinent, and which can go as old as per the carbon dating is like 2400 BCE. So almost 4000 plus year old. And so on that particular one of the graveyard, they found this female warrior had a bow with it. And that's how that bow looked like it. So when I was reading the Dhanurveda and comparing this thing, that let's see if we can find what the literature is talking and what this looked like it. So what I found that this particular bow actually bend at three places, like if you curve like one curve, two curve, and three curve. So that's when I was like shocked that actually how we can basically compare with this particular bow we found it with our literature, that how old our literature can go and how old this bow is. So it's basically gave us like proof at the same time that we can compare that yes, the literature what is talking is continuation of the using from at least 2400 BCE, if not older. And then this one is like only found in, or it's also like type of manova bow, but it's a very rare bow because it's a different type of what you call like paintings, and it's local to the Kashmir Pradesh, so it's from the North India where it's founded. And this is one of the unique bow. I think there's only two bows of this type exist currently, one in the museum and one in the personal collection. And this one is from that personal collection because it was on sale for what you call the some website where I saw that. So it's basically using like a wooden bow, and on the top it's basically have the sinew or the animal tendons layers on it, so that it gave you the good strong strength for that bow. So this one is one of the unique I found it. So I just want to share with you guys, which again, we don't find it anywhere in the Veda, but it was using it 17th, 18th century. And also this is already we saw last time, so I don't want to discuss more detailing that these are all the arrowhead was using from Maratha Empire. That's what they call the old Hindu arrowhead. Now types of arrows. So we do have like three main types of arrows, which is like a Purusha. So Purusha is a masculine arrow, and the way it's defined in the Veda is like the arrows. Like here is the example: the arrow which is like lighter or thinner in the front and thicker in the back is called the Purusha arrow, and this one is particularly used for penetrate the strong objects. And then there's another one, it's called the Stree arrow or the feminine type arrow, which basically does the opposite of it, have like a thicker at the front end and thinner at the back, which basically used to hit the long distance targets. And Napunsak arrow, or basically the practice arrow, we can call it. So this one is the modern day we are using it for our practice purposes. Like whenever we practice in the sports, we use these types of arrow. And then the Nalika, we did talk about Nalika in the last time. In the next slide, I will show you exactly how this device looked like and what those tukkas, the small arrows, used to look like. So this is just a picture of one movie from Korea. It's basically using the similar kind of thing, that they have this like Nalika and have this small arrows over here. And that's how they used to use it. And then the Naraka is a type of arrow which is fully made up of iron or steel. And this is the type of arrow it's used to use. And this is just a sample or example. We don't know exactly how it looks like, but we can as compare only that this is how it could look like it. Now this one is the Nalika. So if you see, this is how the Nalika look like it. And this is the Tukka's arrow, the small arrows. You can see the size of the arrows, and in our next slides, I'll show you exactly the comparison between how big and small it looked like. So these are the actual Tukkas and small arrows actually used for the Nalika's purpose. Aditya, if you have any question with that?
Not really, but
Okay.
it's very interesting information. Because of the size, the arrowheads and other things. And if you do archery, you know that arrowhead plays the most important role. And
right.
And also the one question comes in that when we are talking about Arjun using divine weapons and invokes mantras, and then the same arrows get transformed. So what is that correlation you saw?
So again, it's like, it just defined the way in Mahabharata. It doesn't give us much detail in the Veda about those kind of celestial arrows or mantramukta arrows. It just gave us the names, and we can only we can only imagine how it could be. But because like modern, in the current world, we don't have any detailed specimen or any particular information available for those kind of celestial arrows, so it's hard to say. But for the mechanism, what we had it, I can explain a little bit more, that these small arrows were using for the purpose that it can shoot faster than the non-regular size arrows, and also it can shoot a distance with the almost same speed, because whenever the arrow move, it goes in the zigzag motion, and because of that it slow down the speed. but the smaller arrows doesn't move zigzag because it's cut the length, and that's why it used to use it to hit like for long distance, or I can say the more like in the modern world we can call it the sharpshooters. So the sharpshooters of the archery use these kind of arrows and these particular nalika.
Yeah, and also in the Chandragupta Maurya's fight with the Greeks
Mm-hmm.
at the borders, the Porus actually uses, and it is confirmed by University of Cairo and University of Moscow,
Mm-hmm.
that they use the arrows which were 2 meters long.
Yes. See, I didn't have the example here particularly, but maybe I will show you in our next video. We have still those arrows and those bows, which was currently in the one of the tribe in the Khyber Pass from Pakistan. They are continuous their archery practice. I just didn't included it because it wasn't like doesn't define in the particular detailing in Dhanurveda, but they do continuation of their practice from the time of Alexander till now.
And
They
also,
having the same size of arrows and huge bows they are using it.
yeah, and because they used to fire them from the back of the elephants. And
Yes.
we already know that from the time of Parikshit to Mahapadmananda,
Mm-hmm.
1150 years, that's the length, there was a
Yeah.
complete peace. And I think the first major fight was Alexander's invasions, and that's where
Yes.
it started again. And we all know that, so that means that this knowledge was in Mahabharata also, and Mahabharata
Exactly.
must have used 2 meter long arrows also.
Exactly. Yes, actually, you're right, because they did in Mahabharata talk about it. But in the modern way, it's like almost impossible to, like, to comprehend that kind of knowledge. But I will definitely show in the next video
Okay.
how those arrows looks like it and those bows looks like it.
Right. Okay. Continue, please. Continue.
Yeah. Okay, so Aditya, we just talk about the types of arrowhead. So these are the types of arrowhead actually defined in Dhanurveda, and it's basically defined the purpose of it too. So it's like Aramuk is like, this is how the Aramuk could look like it, which is more like a sharp blade, and it's basically used to pierce the shield. And then the Shurpra is basically pierce the enemy's bows, arrows, or shoulders, like this kind of like a razor blade. And then the Gopucha used to hit the target practice, and then the Ardhachandra used to kill the enemy for the neck or kill or cut their bows. And Suchimukha is also piercing because it's a needle pointing to piercing the armor. And then the Bhalla is also piercing the enemy's heart or piercing the armor, we can call. Dvibhalla is the one I showed the picture in our last video, that how goddess is fighting with the Shumba and cutting his arrows in the air. So that's particular arrowhead, Dvibhalla, is used for that. And then Karnika, and it's where pierce the steel arrows basically. So Karnika is like, this one is basically whenever somebody is hitting the heavy arrows, how to stop them. And the Kakatunda is basically used for all these purposes because it's have a big blade in the front. And this is like, if you don't have any of those arrows, you can use the Kakatunda. So these types of arrowhead actually defined in Mahabharata. But during the time of last 4, 5, 600, it's evolved so much, and a lot of new types of arrowhead also evolved. That's why, and I just want to give you one small point that in all over the world, the types of arrowhead is the most different variety of arrowhead actually found in Japan. And after Japan, the second is the Indian subcontinent, where you can basically have the different types of arrowhead and have different purpose. Nowhere in the world you can find that many types of arrowhead and the purpose. So you can compare like how much archery important at that time and how much science was evolved during that time till 18th century. And this is just some example from different museums and different selections. So this is like types of arrow, which is like a triangular pyramidal arrowhead, which also didn't define in the Dhanurveda, but like I say, it's evolved during the time. And this one is just one example, is used for armor piercing. And then this one, if you notice, this particular arrow have like a really big heavy metal in the front. So it was like when we found it, like when a lot of people look in trying to analyze it, it's hard to know exactly what was the purpose, because if you using through horse archer or the infantry archer, you cannot able to throw this arrow for long distance because it's too heavy in the front. So the arrow make it so heavy. So, but it could be used for the anti-siege, because if you are on the high top of the mountain or in the palace and the castle, and you are basically trying to hit your enemy at the downward, and if you use these arrows, this will be the perfect, because of the heavy metal in the front, it will pierce almost every object. And that's when we found out that it's actually used for that purpose, that particular arrow, which is unique. Again, we don't find this type of arrow anywhere in the world other than India, this particular. And this is the most common arrow we found in India, which is we can call like the sorry this Kaktunda one, which is have like a bigger blade. So this is the most common arrowhead which we found in all over the India, and it's used all over the Indian subcontinent, and it's used for different purposes. So this is just some examples I just want to show the audience that what kind of arrow actually look like and how we were using it. And then this one is another type of arrow, which basically using for the distance shooting, or it's more, I can say, for a sports purpose, because it doesn't have anything which can actually kill the person. So during when you are not at the war or something, but you want to practice your archery. So this is like the sports, which is also very famous right now in different part of Europe or Turkey and other areas. It's basically for it's just used for the distance shootings. And what they do, basically, they make arrows so thin and so light so that you can make a record for like how far you can basically release the arrow. So this particular arrows were found in India, were used for the same purpose. It was using for the same like distance shooting and having a sports purpose. And then there's one thing, again, this one also didn't define, I mean, in particular, Dhanurveda I was referring to, but there are some other Indian literature you can find it. But this detailed record is actually come from the Persian manuscript, that when they were like invading India, they were writing about it, like how, so they were talking about like how Hindus, like the foothill of Hindustan, which is India, that how they were using the different types of arrow and the poisonous arrow. So I don't want to read the whole thing. I'm just going to give you the basic detail. So they use the bones arrowhead, and it's basically simmer into the poison. And we don't know what type of poison because they didn't define it. But in some other books, you can find it the name of the plant which used for the poison purpose. And when they release it to the enemy, it's basically shattered. And the tiniest piece basically goes in anybody. It's basically kill the person. It's like a granite nowadays, you can call it. And if that tiny piece goes in you, it's like a snake poison, and it can kill you instantly. But they say that like if you have a jari, jari is a type of fruit, and it's come from the word jar. Jar is the root, and the trillium root is a type of plant I just showed here, and this is the root. So they say like whenever the Indian archers or the people who are using these poisonous arrows always have these particular roots in their pocket, and they basically eat that if they got hit by the poisonous arrows, which helped them right away. So they had so much, and again, like using the Ayurveda also a part of it, and they are understand and using this for a very long time. And these arrows are like very deadly, and this is like a full record defined in 13th century manuscript. And I just want to show some pictures here, like what kind of tunir or quiver used to use in all over the India. And this is all from the different museums of India. And these are like all made up of bamboo and rotten. I think this one is like kind of cloth or something, but this one is used in different part of and like the cover up. And mostly all these quivers are the back quivers, not the side. So there are two types of quiver. One goes for the back quiver and one goes on the side quiver. So these one mostly are all the back quiver, because these one mostly used by the infantry or the people who are like at the foot and using to release the arrows from. And then this is some examples I want to show, which is basically used for some are like this one is for the horse arrow, horse quiver, or this one is the horse quiver, and this one is the bow cover. Because whenever they do the horse or the horse archers, it's basically you make sure that the bow always is string, because they don't have time to unstring and restring it when they are on the horse and on the war. So they always cover this in that particular cover. And that's why you can see the shape of that cover, that the bow, like half of the bow goes in it, and it's basically covered under it. And then they use this as a side quiver for the horse archers. So these are some examples. And this is like, I want to show you that the whole picture come from the Bikaner Palace Museum, which is currently in Rajasthan. You can see different types of arrowhead here and different types of arrows, and also those small arrows where I found those pictures from. And this one is like, they put the opposite string, because if you do the similar, like if you string it correctly, then it might bend and break for a long time. But like this one already have like a string break. So this one is the Sarang Dhanush or Sarang bow, and this one is the command bow, and this one in the bottom is the steel bow, basically. And so these, or you can we can call that Kamdev bow. That was the word we were using it in the Dhanurveda. So today, this is all the information I want to share today. Aditya ji?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think all these are available in like you have Bikaner Palace Museum.
Mm-hmm.
So all these bows and arrows are kept over there, right?
This is in the Bikaner Palace Museum. Some are in our National Museum in Delhi, but not that much variety. The most variety you can find, like all three types of bows and all type of arrows, it's actually only in Bikaner Palace.
Oh. So,
there is no other place you can basically find it like that much detail.
So that means like if all these type of bows and arrows are being used, there must be large factories also during that time.
Yes. And that's why, like, whenever I talk to some people who try to replicate the old bows from museum, and like one of my close friend, he's from Switzerland, so he make a lot of replication of these bows. So he asked me about so much, like, why it is stopped. Because in India, it was like a huge knowledge come from and huge material come from, like almost whenever they talk archery, the bows and arrows they shows in the museum all over the world, not only in India, are either from Turkey or from India. So this is like, we have so much information all over the world. Why India, we don't know anybody who make the bows. Like we literally have not a single person. I try to contact so many people, which we can assume that in like Sikh leader community. So they basically used to make all the weapons. So I was like, if we can find somebody who actually make those weapons, and it's almost impossible because it's gone. Like the whole process of building is gone.
And also, actually, it was purposely killed by the Muslims.
Exactly, yes.
Purposely killed by the British also.
Right, and that was the purpose. Like they killed it in 18th century, and that's why the last bow of they say it's like they found like in Sindh area, and that's when like till 19th century, early 19th century, they were using it to like some craftsman who was building it, and rest of the India is already gone by the time. And during that time, even that person we don't know. So there are some records of different marshals and different British officers, which I found it. And they, of course, they didn't do all the documentation how they used to make it. they only make a documentation that this is the last person we know that is making it, and after he died, nobody know how they used to make it. But we are trying to bring it back also that way, that building, and maybe someday I will show you guys, like in the video, that step by step process how it made.
And also there are a lot of videos out there which are best uses, like the recurve bows and other bows made of wood. The
Yes.
Black Widow is a very famous brand for, and
Right.
I use
those
Martin
are Korean bows. Yeah.
Yes, Black Widow, the long bows, and I use Martin Hunter a lot.
Okay.
And that's my favorite recurve that I use.
It is recurve bows. Yeah, recurve bows are different. See, I'm not into those type of bows, so I just don't know much detail about recurve bows, or I always use like traditional. So the one I'm currently using it is basically one of the guy from Hungary made for me, and he sent me like the replica, like a laminated wooden bow, but it's more like a Indo-Iranian kind of thing, because that time I didn't have much knowledge about how much bows we have available and how can we made it.
Yeah, generally long bows are very long, also 6 feet and
6
above.
feet.
And and long bows are more easier to fire. And one of the best brands selling in the US is obviously Black Widow. They call it Black Widow for a purpose. And Native Americans also use a lot of bows.
Yes, they have really interesting bows and arrows, actually. Yeah.
And they fought with all the colonized European settlers with the bows and arrows, and later on they traded them with guns.
Yeah.
And also did that. Now, one question comes to the mind is that
quivers,
you showed the quivers.
Yes.
And we all know, and it was very interesting to see so many different types of quivers you showed.
Yes.
Very easy to carry on the back, very easy to hang it around, is compact.
Yep.
And also the one thing is there, the Shastras say that the quiver of Arjun used to replenish itself as soon as he used them.
Yes, I heard about it. Yes.
And also the Sri Ram's quiver would also replenish itself.
Agastya Muni gave it to him.
Yeah. And so Agastya Muni also gave him 2 arrows, which he used for Kumbhakaran and
right. And also that Saranga bow.
Saranga bow.
Yeah, because his old bow was broken with the Khar fight when they fought with the Khar and Dushan. So Khar break his bow, the old one which he was carrying from Ayodhya.
So in Ramayana it is mentioned, so when the bow of Sri Ram was taken out, it was in a large iron box, and that box was pushed by 8 to 1,000 people. So 800,000 people. And that bow was being pushed.
And I think that's exaggeration. I think that's like what you call like the Itihas definition, right? It's a Katha Yuktam.
Again, we cannot assume many things. But what I'm trying to say, if Valmiki has mentioned everything correctly, then this must be also a point to study. Because if everything else comes out true, then why should this be Atishokti? Atishokti exaggeration.
No, definitely, yes. Yeah.
So, and this type of bow was lifted by Sita by her left hand.
Yes.
And which needed almost 5,000 men to push it. And that wheel, that cart had wheel.
Cart had like 6 to 8 wheels,
8 wheels, 8 feet iron box. So such specific descriptions are there.
Right.
And so, it's easy to reject it, but my logic is, if Valmiki Ramayana says rest of the things are true, how come this be an exaggeration?
Yeah, it is. I agree. It's just, and I think you're talking more about that Sita Swayamvar bow from the Janaka.
Right. That's right.
It's a Shiva Dhanush.
Yes.
Or the Shiva bow. So the thing is, like in what I understand with that, or and it could be 100% true. It's just like. Because what happened, that bow was strong, and you practice archery, so you understand more than the normal person that the weight of the bow is not the actual weight, is actual poundage of the bow. Define the weight of the bow. So when they say like nobody can able to string that bow, that means that it's so strong poundage that you need the strength of really, really good archer to string that bow. And that's when Sri Ram was trying to string that bow, it broke.
It broke.
because it was old bow and it was from hundreds year at the Janaka's palace. So that's why I assume that. But again, with the weight, it could be the trolley weight or it could be that bow weight. It's hard to know because it's like in my opinion, it's like the poundage is the one which always defines. So the bow shouldn't be more than, like, I don't know how heavy the long bows can go.
Yeah. And the second incident is in the same Valmiki Ramayana. It mentions
Mm-hmm.
about the Narayan bow, which was used by Parshuram, and
Okay.
which was snatched by Sri Ram by his left hand up.
Yes.
And then there is a third reference of Krishna breaking the bow when he comes
Mm-hmm.
to Mathura from Vrindavan,
Okay.
and then that bow is almost 270 feet long, almost. That's what they say.
Uh-huh.
And
See, I didn't read about that description yet, so maybe I need to read more about
yeah,
those.
he lifts it and it breaks apart.
Okay.
So my point is, now these are from Mahabharat Puran era,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm just trying to say is that the bow and archery making in India was very common thing, and the
Yes,
culture which doesn't know how to protect themselves cannot protect others,
exactly.
including
Yeah,
Sanatan Dharma.
exactly. And mostly these, like, the Kshatriya or the warriors, like you call it, they only not just to use that, they know how to make those too. Because whenever you need it at the time, like, the arrows are empty or you don't need it, they know how to use the stick and make the arrows as sharp as you can so that you can still continue fight. So all that knowledge is just like it's kind of like a lost because of all those bans happen, and then the stop continuation of the process, and nobody is like, it's really hard to preserve. The only thing we have it, like the knowledge we have it, like through the literature or those museum bows.
The swords also, like the
Mm-hmm.
Utkrisht Dhatu was later on called Damascus steel.
Damascus of wood steel. Yeah.
Yeah, wood steel.
Mm-hmm.
Utkrisht Dhatu was always made in India. It was
Yes.
made in Bengal
It was
and
made in Bengal and Tamil Nadu.
Tamil Nadu. So it was already known, and Ashok Pillar is a great example. And
Yes.
there are other pillars like that also. There is Arun Stambh also in Jagannath Puri Mandir.
Mm-hmm.
And Syrians used to speak Sanskrit. Everybody knows 400 BC Sanskrit was a
Oh,
spoken language.
I didn't know that.
Even today, the Syria's traditional country's name is Al Sham.
Oh.
Even today, when they call it amongst themselves, call it Al Sham, and they call Egypt as Misra. Even today,
Misra, yeah. Yeah, and we also call Misra. Yeah.
Misra. Even today they call it,
Yeah.
which is again a Sanskrit name.
Yeah.
And Tarka-Yamasu was also already there. Turk was already named used for Yavana. So
Yeah.
that is also there. And they were considered opponents of Vedic culture. They were
Yeah.
always Yavana fighting against us, which are called Deva.
Yeah.
So all those histories are still there. And normally Asuras have an initial edge over Devatas all the time. Initial edge.
Initial edge.
But warfare, they've always lost.
Modern way we call barbarians too.
Barbar Jati.
Barbar Jati. Yeah, because that's what they define in Mahabharata.
Even today, North Africans, they call them Barbar Jati.
Oh.
Even today. It's in my last book also, Gold, Glory and God. So Barbar Jati, still they consider themselves Barbar. Barbar is the name.
Barbar is the name.
And Barbarta, and also the Bhishma when he's fighting with the other Bhim. Then Bibatsa Yuddha. Bibatsa means it is very frightening for other people to see the fight he is having. Like it has too much bloodshed and it's like red. Like people will get scared by that style of fighting, which was also very common in India, which Bhim fought with.
Yes.
There's a Bhim where people were scared to fight with Bhim because it's going to be just not a clean cut.
No. Yeah, he's a strong guy.
Strong guy, and also it is to show others, to scare others. So this might happen to you if you fight with me.
Yeah.
And so all these different forms of fighting have been lost. So I think we should also do a show on swords because...
See, I'm not expert in it, but if you want, I can look into it and give some
Yeah.
detail. The thing is like, because I only read about like mostly archery stuff and practice that, but again, like I said, Dhanurveda have on like maybe we can discuss about through the literature point of view,
Mm.
because in Dhanurveda there's out of 8 chapter, 1 chapter is dedicated to swords only.
Yeah. Let's do that. Let's do that. And thank you so
Okay.
much for sharing.
Yeah.
And also share something on the bombs and the explosions, because Chinese did not invent gunpowder. It is I mean, till date they have not invented anything on their own. So how can we assume that they would have done that too over there? India has, even today they develop some things on their own. You know.
Yeah, and I think I talked a little bit in the last video. So in Shukraniti, it's called Agni Churna.
Agni Churna. That's right.
That Agni Churna is basically the gunpowder, and Agni Churna is using very long time.
There is a shloka in Mahabharata also talks about Agni Churna.
Mm-hmm.
You're right.
Yeah, and that Agni Churna is using very long time. And we had Agnyastra, the one I was talking last week. Last time we talked about that they have that particular type of arrow with like little ball in the front. Is full with that, and they hit it as like explode. So it's using their Agni Churna from that long.
And also people, they question me all the time on the yantra. So when Narad Muni tells Yudhishthir on yantra, it is also talking about the ball being thrown with the force of the fire, which is almost like a gun action.
Yes.
So yantra was kept all over Ayodhya. In Ramayana it is mentioned. And
it's called Shatagni.
Shatagni. That's right. And so the top, which is top.
Yeah.
The big ball.
Yeah, it's basically what the cannon you can call it now.
Cannot call it. And so all these are already there. So we think that we are more modern, but actually we are just fine-tuning the systems of death every day.
Yeah.
But
yeah, and again, it's like a lot of people, we don't know the knowledge either, because not very much people read about it.
Yeah.
And or read about ourselves, or read by in our schooling or in the education, so where people kind of aware of understanding this whole thing. And I have interest, so I read about it. But like not everybody, if you ask somebody else, like they have no idea what is Shatagni is, or what is Agni Churna means, or any of those things. So because they never read it and they never try to understand. So but then again, like there is so many people who want to learn, but they don't know where to start, because Ramayana and Mahabharata is so huge for a normal person with your day-to-day work. It's hard to read it.
Actually, what I always suggest is, instead of trying to read the whole Mahabharata from page 1 to page 2, I say just open up the book, and whatever your eyes can get through, at least read that. At least.
Yes.
You may read 20 pages, 30 pages, but your life will be made. I'm telling you for sure. And you may read some 20 pages of Ramayana, but the point is that do not bring that religious mindset that I have to read from the first sloka right till the 100.
Yeah, read as a reference book.
Read as a reference book, like something you do not find. Just pick up the pages and start searching. Gita Press is available. Bhandarkar edition is available. I would always prefer Gita Press, but Bhandarkar edition also people can read. And that's how you just bring it forward. And also there is a wrong notion that you have to read the entire Veda. No, just read Bhagavad Gita. Is a summary of entire Veda.
Bhagavad Gita is the best thing. It's transformed my life when I was start reading. It's like when I was going through with tough time, it's actually Bhagavad Gita helped me a lot. And a lot of people think like, oh, because we are Hindus and we talk about that, it's actually help.
Yeah. No, and Bhagavad Gita is for the entire humanity, not just for
Hindus. Right, exactly.
It's not the birthright of Hindus, because Hindus don't read it nowadays. They write to read other things.
Yes, true.
At least somebody should read it and become a Hindu.
True. Yeah, it's just like, but no, again, my point was like, I was reading about, like when I wrote the Bhagavad Gita first time, and it wasn't very long enough. I was like maybe 5 years before or 6 years before when I talked to my mom first time, and I was angry on her that why you didn't tell this thing before, like why you never let us read these things before. It's like, because like when I read about it, I was like, we talk about modern science and everything, and like how to live your life and betterment and all. Bhagavad Gita have everything.
Everything.
You just
I've written two
yeah.
translations on it.
Oh,
So
okay.
one is the Gita and one is the Hindu Bible. And the Hindu Bible is for the Americans and Gita is for the Indians or
Hmm.
Hindu background people. So the point is like, even though I have translated it, and still it's not enough for me.
Yeah.
I go back to the same shloka again and again and again, and something new comes out.
Yeah.
Something new. Like
Yeah.
yesterday, I was speaking on some class, and I was simple shloka, Sar Dharman Parityaja. Everybody knows that shloka.
Hmm.
I told somebody that I can write 500-page book on just one shloka. It has so
Yeah.
many points. Like
It is so many points. Yeah.
one word has like so many connotations, so many denotations, so many case studies on that.
Hmm.
And I call the Vedic literature is a collection of good case studies to
Yeah.
build our character. I mean,
Yeah. 18 different case studies on 18 different point of views.
18 different point of views, and every shloka is a story in itself. Every
Yeah.
shloka.
Yeah. And
Well,
amazingly defined. Amazingly defined.
amazingly, and Krishna doesn't keep it boring at all.
No. No.
It's like
Even
you
Mahabharata, when you start reading, you can't put the book down.
put down.
It's so fascinating.
So fascinating. You will forget about your TV shows. You
Yeah.
forget about
Everything.
your everything
Everything.
else. I mean, there is
Everything.
just the love story of Nal and Damayanti. It's like
Yeah.
you
Or
can't
Dur.
even you can't
Yeah.
even imagine the kind of poetry, the beauty of the culture, and the beauty of the character. So it's a lot of things to understand. A great presentation, and I think it's a wonderful way to start rethinking and see where are we getting losing it out, because
Mhm.
unless we know how to defend ourselves, we cannot defend Sanatan Dharma.
Exactly. And again, and not only the defending, is also our culture and our knowledge system. It's like you need to bring it back. Like a yoga started because like it started in the term like in the Western, that Swami Vivekananda is the one who gave their speech and explain about it, and people like, what is this, and then like Swami Prabhupada talk about Bhagavad Gita all over the Western world, and there's like, who is this guy? And like, so it's all the knowledge we had. It's just you need the right people to. And in India right now, my focus is like we need to more aware of these kind of things for our, especially in Indians, because they have no idea. They just keep like whoever want to practice archery specific, or any weapon or any kind of exercise or practice, they going and running towards like modern archery and recurve bow, or like or like Olympic bow or a compound bow. And I was like, no, we have so much knowledge, we have so much information, why can't we just use that?
I'll end with the point that Mahabharata doesn't say play defensive all the time. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
you have to play offensive to be defensive. And therefore, the Mahabharata always says that a Raja should fight the war minimum 800 miles, 100 yojana from their furthest border. So
Yeah.
if India was to follow that, it will automatically become Vishwaguru, because from
Mm-hmm.
Kashmir, 800 miles goes that our first defense line starts at Kyrgyzstan.
Yeah.
So, and from the east and the west, obviously, our first defense line is from Turkey then. You know,
Yeah.
so we have to, I think, relearn our history and reteach, and also
Mm-hmm.
relive. We are very proud of our faith and culture. It is shown by the Pew Research and many things, but we are not doing much about it. We're just proud. I think the action
Yes.
is lacking, and I think
Yes.
every person who is born in India is an ambassador for this Vedic culture.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't do it, it's your loss. It's not
Yeah,
anybody.
and I think nowadays people want everything well cooked. They don't want to go and try to, like Nilesh ji say, you need to do your tapasya.
No,
And
but
nowadays people don't do very much,
the people like you and I are all making up 2 minute Maggie noodles right now, making it
Right,
easy.
right,
You're
exactly.
breaking it down. Like Nilesh is breaking it down. You're breaking
Right,
it down. We are breaking it down.
right.
But rest of the people have to also step up.
Step up and come up with the new things and bring
Come
it
up
up
with
the
the
new
new
things.
things. We need a
Yes.
million mouths speaking the same thing.
Right. I agree.
Yeah, a billion maybe, a trillion maybe, because the
Yeah.
world needs Sanatan Dharma, and wherever there is a dharma, you have to destroy it. You
Yes.
cannot tolerate a dharma.
Yes.
If
The
you tolerate a
Dhanurveda.
dharma, that becomes a dharma.
Yeah, and Dhanurveda actually, when we talk about like Lord Brahma, why he created it, the whole story of like I'm planning to, I don't know yet, but I'm planning to write a book called The Story of Dhanurveda, and that will going to just talk about the more actual story, when it's a start and how it start and what was the purpose. So the whole purpose is for to preserve the dharma.
That's right.
It's like the Kshatriya dharma is actually created to preserve the dharma.
Dharma. And nowadays, Kshatriyas are only busy in marriage ceremonies, not all of them, some of them.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it's our duty to protect Sanatan Dharma through weapons, and proactively, wherever there is adharma, you have to remove adharma. That's what
Right.
the whole purpose of Rasuya Yajna was. That was the whole purpose. And people do not understand that dharma brings peace, prosperity, and happiness.
Exactly.
Adharma brings violence. You see what is happening in Pakistan. It's an entirely adharmic country.
Hmm.
Afghanistan and many parts of the world, which is very adharmic. It
Hmm.
should be the duty of the Indian government to protect.
Yeah.
Should go out proactively, use the Indian armies and Indian
Mhm.
forces to do that. It's not aggression. I think the world will welcome it. The world is actually begging India to use their large armed forces to maintain peace in the Indian Ocean, fight
Yes.
with China, to fight with Pakistan, but we are the only ones who step back. Then
Yeah.
America has to fly in 12,000 miles to fight in Afghanistan.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
So I think, thank you so much for presentation, Pankaj, and it's a
Yeah. Thank you.
pleasure to speak
Yes.
with you.
Yes.
It's a
Thank
fresh
you.
information. I love it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
All the viewers, please like it and send it out to your friends. We don't do any promotion on social media, so we want you to promote it and read it and first hear it and then share it. Namaste.
Namaste.